you doing?
Sometimes people say to me, you know, God gave him this gift. Yeah, sometimes it can be a curse too, because it's a tough life to lead to be a superstar.
The minute the Colonel would come in, Elvis would, his whole character would change. He would get more uptight and more nervous and a little more, all of us girls kind of noticed that.
As long as Elvis didn't know what he was doing, Colonel Parker could do whatever he wanted.
It would not have come into his mind to say, wait a minute, I'm going to do what I want to do.
He was very, very loyal to the guys, and they just were not capable of helping him with his problems.
There's nothing we can do. He has to want to do it in order for it to change, and he didn't want to do it.
Obviously, if he were mentally in good shape, he would be here today. But the real disease was drugs.
Elvis could have got drugs from anywhere, anytime, any place, because he was Elvis Presley.
And I talked to him about seeing a shrink, number one, because we had talked about a lot of personal problems, and he's a very unhappy guy.
He was just a guy that had a great voice and a great smile and a great heart and a great sense of humor. But he was also very unsophisticated. So, you know, it was a bit much for him.
He didn't think he'd live very long in his life.
I met Elvis in Germany in 1959 when I was in the Army there in Friedberg. Him and I were stationed at the same base, and met him, became friends, instant friends. Before we left Germany, we left in February of 1960. Just before we left, he asked what I was going to do when I got out of the Army. I said, I'm going to go back to Chicago, just pick up where I left off. He said, why don't you come to work for me? I didn't have to think too long, and I said, okay. That's how it started. I was with him for 17 years, dedicating all my time to him, and all of a sudden it ended. For about 3 months, I was fine. I was working busy. Then I realized, hey, he's not going to be back anymore.
I left home when I was about 18, and I had moved to Las Vegas. I was dating a gambler, and he was gambling, and he didn't want me around. So he said, why don't you go see, you know, Elvis? So I went and I saw him, and Joe Esposito brought me backstage, and Elvis threw a grape at me and hit me in the forehead, and then he had to come over and say hello, and then I left the dressing room, and he called and asked that I come over, and I did. I think that when I left him, he died within a year.
First time I met Elvis was at the Houston Astrodome on February 27th, 1970. It was his first live appearance outside Vegas in 9 years, and it was a big thrill for me. My father had met Elvis years before at the Eagles Hall in Houston, and my uncle had booked him down there back in 1955. And evidently he remembered my dad. And I walked up to him and I said, hello, Mr. Presley. And he said, what's your name, kid? And I told him. After that, my father and I saw him again in Dallas in November 1971. 8 days later, my father and my mother and my sister were killed. They were hit by a train. And my grandmother contacted his office, and he found out about it, and he sent me a condolence card. And that's how it all started.
I was more or less in charge. I was his personal aide. I took care of everything for him, travel arrangements, paid the bills, kept receipts, and more or less was in charge of the guys that worked for him.
He was his father, brother, best friend, sense of humor, and pimp. You know, I mean, he was all those things to Elvis.
I was excited that when he got married, I was the best man at his wedding. That was a thrill, a big highlight of my life with him. Elvis was my friend first and my boss second. He was a wonderful person, very considerate, very generous with giving things, paid for everything, and he was just a nice guy. He liked people to enjoy his money with him.
He was, you know, tossing his scarves out, and he threw this one scarf out to this little girl, and he caught in the corner of his eye that a woman, like in her 40s, had grabbed the scarf, and he just kind of shrugged and he looked down at it. He was, you know, really disgusted about it, and then he said, "Come up here, little girl." He said, "I want you to have this," and he took off this $100,000 diamond-encrusted cross, and he put it around her neck. And he told the security guard to the side of the stage, he says, "You stand by her for the whole show and make sure she makes it to the car with that cross. Don't let anybody take it away from her."
Elvis was a compulsive person. He would buy things on a whim. And then when he bought something, he'd buy it for everybody else too. If he bought a new car, and he said, "Well, I think my friends need new cars too," so he'd buy everybody a new car. I was in Vail, Colorado. And while I was there, he said, "Joe, look at that Rolls Royce. Wouldn't you like that?" I said, "No, I don't want that car." I said, "I'll cause trouble in the group, and I don't want you to go out and buy 10 Rolls Royces." So he said, "I got to get you something." I said, "Don't give me anything. Just give my girlfriend, Shirley. She doesn't have a car." He gave her a brand new Eldorado. And he would do this periodically with a lot of things, jewelry, cars, horses, trucks, and everything he did. That's the way he was.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the pump began to swing. You should have heard the knocked out jailbird sing and rock.
With Joe Esposito managing his personal affairs, Elvis returned to Hollywood to resume his spectacular career. And he found that during the 2 years he'd been away, he'd become a bigger star than he was when he left.
I gave a letter to the postman. He put it in his sack.
Elvis was a wreck about acting, and I knew how he felt because he was still so insecure about his acting. He was so solid and secure as a performer, as an entertainer, and when it came to acting, he would start telling jokes about himself. Before you could put him down, he'd put himself down.
He got very tired of doing the movies that he was doing.
Step right up to the love machine.
I can do better than that.
Elvis Presley and I did a movie called Spin Out, which was basically your musical about race cars. How those two things came together, I don't know. I guess because of Elvis.
That's a go. Scoot before you lose control. Spin out.
Elvis was offered the role in Midnight Cowboy as Joe Buck.
Where's that Joe Buck? Where's that Joe Buck? Where's that Joe Buck? Yeah, where's that Joe Buck?
And it would have been a challenging role for Elvis, but Colonel Parker said no deal.
Hold my hand and we'll halfway there.
West Side Story would have been a great challenge for Elvis, and I'm sure he would have met it, but the Colonel refused to let him do it. Robert Mitchum came up to see Elvis in his hotel suite, and he asked him to do Thunder Road. He had written it with him in mind, and again, Elvis wanted to do it, but the Colonel said no.
Yeah, baby, the rain must fall. Baby, the wind.
Maybe the Rain Must Fall was a perfect vehicle for Elvis, about a young boy from the South singing, and he wanted to do it, but the Colonel just wouldn't let him.
Kazan wanted to use him in a movie with Natalie Wood, and he was not allowed to do that.
In 1975, Elvis was asked to play Rudolph Valentino in a feature film at $2.5 million, and why the Colonel said no is a mystery.
He was offered the Chris Christopherson role in the remake of The Star is Born.
Elvis was up at the Las Vegas Hilton, and he had just finished a show, and Barbra Streisand came up to visit with Elvis, and they talked to Elvis about Elvis co-starring with Streisand, and Elvis really wanted to do it. For just a while there, he had the spark of really doing something really important in film, and it was his chance. He wanted to do it, but Red West told me, he says, the next day, he was like, okay, Elvis, we're going to do A Star is Born, you know, it's going to be like the old days, and you're going to be better than ever, and Elvis said, oh, I can't do it. He said, what do you mean you can't do it? He said, I talked to the Colonel, and he says, I can't do it.
By the time he did The Trouble with Girls and Change of Habit in 1969, Hollywood and everybody else considered Elvis Presley movies to be a joke.
Frankie and me, we are lovers. Oh, Lordy, how we can love.
At the time, you really didn't want to do an Elvis film. It wasn't like really a step up in your career or whatever, you know. But they paid me money. So I kind of suddenly felt like that was a step up in my career.
This is my lucky day. Love's in the cards, I'd say.
It's sad in a way that he never had a chance to do what he really thought he could do.
Go eat and drink and feast. Go east, young man.
He could have gone on to be a really good actor, as well as always a performer, and probably found more satisfaction and peace in his life.
Every film seemed to use exactly the same story as the last one, transferred to a different setting. It had a dozen or so songs that didn't sound any different than the tunes in his previous film. His movie box office had nosedived.
I got news for you, baby. I did 29 pictures like that.
Elvis knew that it was time to reinvent his career.
When he started back in '69, when we opened up in Las Vegas, he hadn't performed in 8 years. And in Vegas, the first time he failed, because people didn't care for him in Vegas that time. But in '69, when he walked on that stage, and I saw that audience give him a standing ovation, all these big invited guests, which usually just sit and don't move, you know, all these people from show business all standing up applauding him, and you could just see the look on his face. He was just felt so good that he was received this way. And they stood up through almost the whole show. He walked off that stage, he must have been 10 feet off the ground.
Get one night with you.
He was so thrilled. I saw tears in his eyes because he was so thrilled. And that was, I get goosebumps thinking about it right now, in fact.
You know, there's no normal woman that can't get excited when he walks on. He's so dynamic.
Love me tender, love me true. Never let me go.
My daughter went to see the show Tuesday night, and she got kissed by Elvis, and she hasn't washed her face since.
He knew after that show that he needed to be on stage. And that's when we started touring again.
Elvis, why did you start making public appearances again?